Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the VolitionRX Ltd presentation today at the NobleCon17 conference. I'm Scott Powell. I'm the Head of Investor Relations and the U.S. Chief Financial Officer for VolitionRX Ltd. Turning to this slide, it's our forward-looking statements and disclaimer slide. I will be making some forward-looking statements during today's presentation, which may or may not be realized in the future. So I do point you to our forward-looking statements, disclosure and disclaimer statement here. Moving to this slide, Volition's mission is simple. We want to save lives. What do we mean by this? What we mean by this mission statement is that if we look at our area of focus, which is for diseases in oncology, so primarily for different cancer types, if we look at the way that cancer is currently screened, there tend to be very few blood tests that are used as frontline screens for many cancer types. So the screens we have currently to screen for various cancer types are X-rays, MRIs, CAT scans, biopsies, colonoscopy for colorectal cancer, and so forth. So a lot of these screens are invasive, can potentially harm the patient, can be expensive. Many of them are much better at late stage detection than early stage, which is obviously the inverse of where we want to be when it comes to cancer detection. Working in blood has numerous advantages. One is that blood is a preferred modality. It's convenient, it's easy, it's simple, it's inexpensive to give blood samples. And most of us comply with blood testing. For instance, if we look at colorectal cancer, the problem with the colonoscopy is not one of accuracy, but one of compliance. Not enough people comply with their screening obligation and get screened for this cancer type because they don't like the modality. So for instance, in colorectal cancer, many of you know us for the work that we've done in colorectal cancer over the year. That same person that may be refusing a colonoscopy or a fecal test to get screened for colorectal cancer probably wouldn't refuse the blood test if there were an accurate and readily available test for him or her to take. So we believe that by introducing a new modality, blood testing, to screen for different cancer types, we offer a highly attractive modality alternative to the current modalities and screens. We get more people screened by driving compliance rates up and driving testing rates up. We catch these cancers earlier because people are getting screened more frequently and at younger ages, and we improve outcomes by catching cancers earlier and therefore saving lives. So that's a bit about our mission statement. Now, the recent developments at the end of 2020 are probably of most interest to you, the listening audience, and that is the work that we've been doing in the veterinary space and the first product that we launched at the end of November. So I'm going to skip ahead, talk about our first commercial product, talk about the veterinary space a little bit, and then move into our human health research, the clinical studies we're doing in a variety of cancers in human health, and talk about those studies and the potential usage of these blood tests in those various screening ecosystems. So we'll just point you quickly to our state-of-the-art laboratory and office building here in Belgium. We purchased several years ago about a 20,000 square foot facility. Most of our research is done here. Most of our scientific staff are headquartered here. We also have an office in London where much of the senior management team sits. We have an office in Austin, Texas, where our U.S. and our veterinary teams sit, and we have an office in Singapore. And just a couple months ago, we purchased another facility very close to this one here in Belgium, about a kilometer down the road from this facility in the same industrial park, about a 10,000 square foot facility called Silver One. And the purpose of that is to allow us to ramp up production of our veterinary blood test and to perform R&D for other companies, and to manufacture and bring a lot of the manufacturing of antibodies and controls in-house. So I will move to our veterinary slides. So at the end of November, we launched our first product, our first commercial product, called the NuQ, launched in collaboration with Texas A&M University in College Station, Texas. In 2019, Volition formed a wholly owned subsidiary called Volition Veterinary Diagnostics Development, LLC, to focus on our veterinary applications. And we granted Texas A&M University a 12.5% equity ownership stake in our wholly owned subsidiary. In return for granting Texas A&M University 12.5% equity interest, Texas A&M ran the clinical studies in canines for us using our technology, enrolled the canines, reported the results, and is now helping us commercialize this blood test for canines by selling it exclusively, at the moment, exclusively through Texas A&M University. So if we look at the next slide here, you can see the Texas A&M logo at the bottom of the slide. And if we look to the clinical data, the performance of our blood test here on this slide, you can see the results on the left. Canine lymphoma, that is the second most common form of canine cancer. And you can see the results. We had an area under the curve of 87.3%. Very strong clinical data in detecting canine lymphoma in this clinical study. You can see that our sensitivity and specificity were broken out here below the AUC. Sensitivity is your false negative rate, specificity is your false positive rates. You subtract these percentages from 100%, and the first one, sensitivity, gives you your false negative rate, so 26%, and your false positive rate, 0, no false positives. So you can move your cutoff points to increase or decrease sensitivity and specificity, typically one at the expense of the other. So in other words, we wanted to peg our specificity at 100%, meaning there were no false positives. So not one canine was incorrectly flagged as having canine lymphoma when in fact they did not. And at 100% specificity, we achieved 74% sensitivity. So with no false positives, we accurately identified about 3/4 of canines with canine lymphoma. So this was done through a simple, inexpensive blood test with a great partner, Texas A&M University, of canine cancer. On the right, the results were even more spectacular when we looked at Homogenous Sarcoma. This is the most common form of canine cancer. So with a very high area under the curve, 97.6%, we broke out our sensitivity and specificity. We pegged our specificity at 100%, so again, no false positives in the study, and we accurately identified almost 90%, or about 9 out of 10 canines with Homogenous Sarcoma, the most common form of canine cancer. So the results were very strong using a single proprietary biomarker, and these results were good enough that Texas A&M felt that we should immediately move to commercialize the product, which we have done. And I'll show you some data here on the prior slide. It's being sold. You can see the logo there on the bottom right. It's being sold through Texas A&M University's gastrointestinal laboratory. It's available for sale on their website currently. The way that the economics work are that our cost of goods is well under $10 to manufacture this blood test. We sell it to Texas A&M's GI lab for $45 per test. They resell it to veterinarians for $122. And then the veterinarian's suggested retail price to canine owners is between $160 and $200. So we have a very strong gross margin, 85 to 90% gross margin on this product. And Texas A&M is incentivized because they make a profit on their markup when selling to vets, and they own 12.5% of our wholly owned subsidiary, so they're well incentivized. The way that they are marketing it for us is initially they have gone out to the DVM, the Doctor of Veterinary Medicine graduates who are now practicing veterinarians, and have notified these former students, these graduates, of the availability of our blood test for canines. About 90% of all veterinarians in the state of Texas got their DVM at Texas A&M University. So now that Texas A&M has gone out to their graduates, we've pretty well saturated and notified the Texas veterinary community of the availability of our blood test. In addition, Texas A&M University featured an article of our announcing our blood test on the front page of the Eagle, which is their student newsletter. And they're also going out to 7 other veterinary colleges and research labs across the United States that they have relationships with, to ask them to do the same thing, to notify their vets, their graduates, of the availability of this blood test. So we hope to have a steady and significant ramp in terms of revenue and sales from this blood test through those channels. In addition, we've announced publicly that we are seeking to actively speak with some of the large animal health diagnostics companies. So think Mars, think Heska, think IDEX, some of the common and large, commonly known and large companies in the space, to approach them to see what interest they would have in a potential licensing deal. And if we have interest from them, if we can strike a mutually beneficial licensing agreement, then we would probably proceed with a relationship with one of these large animal health diagnostics companies to then launch our product throughout the rest of the United States and also launch it globally. You may have seen a press release from a few weeks ago. We added Dr. Tom Butera to our board of directors. Dr. Butera is a senior executive at Mars. So a little bit about the size of the veterinary market. If you look here at this slide, you can see it's a significant market. 38% of U.S. households have a canine. There are about 77 million canines in the United States alone, and 83% of canines visit the vet at least once per year, many of them for healthy checkups. You can see the 2 bubbles on the right, about 6 million cancer diagnoses in canines in the U.S. each year alone. So pretty substantial number of canines that are being diagnosed with cancer. The actual number of canines with cancer is likely much greater than 6 million, because many canines pass away without having a confirmatory diagnosis. Sometimes your dog is sick and it passes, unfortunately, and you don't perform an autopsy on the dog, of course, so you don't ultimately know what the cause of death was. So the 6 million is probably much greater than that, but these are just the confirmed cases annually. So it's a large market. How would our test fit into the screen ecosystem for canines in the United States? So vets tell us that they have a very hard time differentiating between cancer, inflammation, and infection. So and they also tell us that certain breeds of canines are predisposed to getting 1 or 2 particular cancer types. So if your canine is sick, demonstrating symptoms that may or may not be associated with colorectal cancer, that may be associated with cancer, and your breed of canine is predisposed to either Homogenous Sarcoma and or canine lymphoma, and you and the vet don't know what's causing these symptoms, your dog could be a candidate to take the Volition blood test to screen for cancer, to rule in or rule out cancer. The vets have a really hard time identifying cancer early on. Many times the vets sort of guess what might be wrong with your canine when you take it to the veterinary hospital. They often don't like to perform all sorts of X-rays and scans and biopsies, so sometimes they may just do a simple diagnosis, send you back with some pills to put into your dog's food. Sometimes after a few weeks, the canine really isn't any better. In fact, the pills could actually be harming the canine, because oftentimes they don't have a really firm definitive diagnosis. So you may be back at the vet a few weeks or a couple months later, and your canine really isn't much better at all. At that point, they may do more invasive testing. They may conduct biopsies. They may do scans. So X-rays, imaging technologies to see if they can identify what's causing these symptoms. The issue with that is it's expensive. Much of it is unnecessary because a lot of times they're doing a lot of scans and biopsies because they really don't know what's wrong with your canine. So there's a cost to the system. There's a cost to the pet owner. Most pet owners in the United States don't have pet insurance, so there's a lot of out-of-pocket cost. And it's additional pain and suffering to the canine. In addition, the canines don't sit still for scans for biopsies. So typically, your canine has to be anesthetized. And just like with humans, sometimes we have adverse reactions to anesthesia. Sometimes canines do as well. So there's a cost to that, and there's potential risk to the canine. So a tool like ours for symptomatic canines that could rule in or rule out cancer really early on would allow for a faster definitive diagnosis of what's really causing the symptoms in the canine, less cost to the pet owner because the diagnostic test would be more targeted, the therapy would be more targeted because they would have a definitive diagnosis, less cost to the healthcare system, and ultimately improved outcomes for your canine. So a lot of utility here, very large market. And in addition to symptomatic screening, so when your dog is presenting with symptoms, if you look at the statistic on your left, you can see that 20 million canines in the U.S. are age 7 or older. Canines upon turning age 7 are much more likely to develop cancer than canines under age 7. So just like in humans, age is strongly correlated to a variety of cancers in humans, which is why screening is recommended for colorectal cancer asymptomatically beginning at age 45. Screening is recommended asymptomatically for men at age 50 for prostate cancer in the U.S. So the same could be done for canines. Right now, there really isn't much in the way of asymptomatic screening done for canines, but our blood test could potentially be used for asymptomatic screening if your canine is predisposed to one of these two cancer types. So for instance, your canine turns age 7. Let's say it's a Labrador. Let's say Labradors are predisposed to canine lymphoma. You could go into your vet and have your vet order a Volition blood test to screen for canine lymphoma for your Labrador beginning at age 7, and then perhaps every year thereafter for an asymptomatic check because your animal is predisposed to that. And if it tests positive, you're likely to then have caught this canine lymphoma, for instance, at an earlier stage where the treatment would be more effective, less expensive, and the outcomes much more likely to be a positive outcome. So this is how our blood test for canines would fit into the U.S. animal health screening ecosystem. So we're really excited about this opportunity. Texas A&M has been a great partner, and we look forward to announcing sales data as we move through the course of 2021. We have not given any revenue guidance. It's really too early for us to know what sort of uptake we will have from this and how fast there will be uptake, but it is a large market, and our blood test addresses about 1/3 or identifies about 1/3 of all canine cancers. So the next steps are to run additional studies with Texas A&M to see if we can, A, improve upon the already high sensitivity for these two cancer types by adding additional biomarkers. And then also we would like to look at other canine cancers to see if we can be able to identify, say, 50, 60, 70% of all canine cancers. So really excited about the opportunity that that is in front of us here. Now, the cancers is that they're both blood-borne cancers, Homogenous Sarcoma and lymphoma. So while we were analyzing these two cancers in canines, we also did the same here in humans. So we began looking at blood-borne cancers in humans. We were very pleasantly surprised with the results we were getting in canine cancers in dogs. So we decided to look at some blood-borne cancers in humans. And we got some good results. You can see the size of the market, about 700,000 new cases of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, acute myeloid leukemia, and ALL globally each year, with over 400,000 deaths each year. And you can see that the non-specific symptoms often delay diagnosis. So there's a need for an additional test, ideally a blood test like ours, to be run early on to aid in the diagnosis, to rule in or rule out a number of blood-borne cancers in humans. summary of some studies we've looked at to date. Again, we're getting really solid areas under the curve. We're getting solid sensitivity and specificity. You can see some of the statistics here. AUCs are between 85 and 88%. Pegging specificity at 95%. In one study, we detected more than 60% of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma patients. And when we pegged specificity at 90% or a 10% false positive rate, we identified almost 3/4 of those patients with non-Hodgkin's. From the next slide is that we have selected a CRO in the US to help us commence a large-scale study in non-Hodgkin's lymphoma as well as some other blood-borne cancers. We haven't announced who the CRO is yet. We plan to announce that obviously when we reach an agreement with them, or if we reach an agreement with them. And then we will launch these studies looking at least NHL, ALL, and AML, and perhaps some other blood-borne cancers. And we'll, of course, announce interim results as we have data to report. So this is something to watch over the course of 2021, hopefully as we reach an agreement with the CRO and begin to enroll patients and begin to announce some preliminary results in blood-borne cancers. Many of you know Volition for the work that we've done in colorectal cancer, and to a lesser extent, some of the work we've done in lung cancer. I mentioned colorectal cancer a bit earlier, and it's actually one of the cancer types for which we have a very good screen. The colonoscopy is the primary screen for colorectal cancer in the United States and in other countries. And for countries that don't use the colonoscopy as much, they tend to use fecal testing for screening for colorectal cancer. So the fecal immunochemical test, or FIT is the acronym, or the fecal occult blood test, or FOBT is the acronym. The problem with these screens is one of compliance. People generally don't like colonoscopies. There's a lot of prep. It's a day, maybe a day and a half out of work. You have to flush your system. You are administered anesthesia, so you can't take yourself to or from the appointment or drive yourself to or from the appointment. It's expensive. It's invasive. It's not without risk. Fecal testing is unpleasant because it's self-administered. So the issue is people just don't comply enough with their screening obligations for this cancer type. That's a big problem because colorectal cancer is asymptomatic in the early stages. So here you have a large problem. You have one of compliance. People don't like the modality options available to them, so a lot of people don't get screened. You compound that with the fact that it's an asymptomatic cancer in the early stages. You have a number of people who turn 45, don't get a colonoscopy, 50, 60, then they're 65 or 70, and they've never had a colonoscopy or a fecal test, so they've never been screened for this cancer type. Unfortunately, about 0.3% of those individuals, which is the prevalence rate in the United States currently, will develop colorectal cancer in the age bracket of 45 to 75 years old. And unfortunately, if they develop symptoms and they finally then go for a colonoscopy, which is the only definitive diagnosis, and it is confirmed that they have colorectal cancer and they're symptomatic, it's probably late stage. And at that point, it's often too late to save that person. If colorectal cancer is diagnosed in stage 1, you have a 90% chance of a 5-year survival, of living more than 5 years. 5-year survivability drops to 7% when you're diagnosed with stage 4 colorectal cancer. So you have a 90% chance of living more than 5 years with stage 1 colorectal cancer, a 93% chance of dying in 5 years if you're diagnosed with stage 4. Early detection is the key. Modality is the problem. Volition hopefully will provide the solution because, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we have a blood-based test. We need to show accuracy. I think if we can show accuracy, we'll drive those compliance rates up substantially because that same person who may refuse a colonoscopy at age 45 probably would not refuse a blood test at age 45, especially one that can be added on to your requisition sheet when you're going in for your annual health checkup and your doctor gives you a requisition form to go down to the back of his or her office or go down to Quest or LabCorp and have blood work done, and he or she ticks all these blood tests at the bottom of the requisition form. All they have to do is tick another box and get you screened for a Volition blood test. And at that point, why would you refuse it? Why would you tell the doctor not to? What blood tests the doctor is running? You trust that your doctor knows that based upon your age, lifestyle, risk factors, family history, any predispositions, that he or she is ordering the appropriate blood test for you. So we need to show accuracy, and we have shown accuracy in smaller studies. We need to show accuracy in larger studies. We are running those currently. We have a study at National Taiwan University in Taipei. We hope to have some data from that study towards the end of this year. We were participating in the largest, well, we are participating in the largest study ever conducted in the United States in colorectal cancer. That study paused in 2020 due to COVID. We hope that that study will commence in 2021, and we hope to have some data from U.S. subjects going forward. If we can show accuracy in large studies, we will definitely drive compliance rates up for the reasons I mentioned. People generally aren't averse to blood testing as they are to colonoscopies, for instance. That means we get more 45 and 50-year-olds screened. That means if they test positive, they'll be going for that colonoscopy at a much earlier age than if they hadn't done our blood test and hadn't done a colonoscopy. We'll then catch a lot more cancers when they're colorectal cancers at earlier stages, thereby improving outcomes and saving lives, driving colorectal cancer from becoming the second leading cause of cancer-related death in the United States. It kills 50,000 Americans annually. The only cancer that kills more Americans is lung cancer, which kills about 158,000 Americans annually. So, we are hopeful that we can drive those death rates down substantially by introducing a blood test and a modality that people would actually use. So excited about the opportunity in colorectal cancer. There are over 100 million Americans of screening age for colorectal cancer, over 150 million Europeans of screening age for colorectal cancer. Compliance rates are about 66% in the US and about 50% in Europe. So about 2/3 of Americans are compliant, only about half of Europeans are compliant. These are large markets, particularly the non-compliant market in both the US and in Europe. And then lastly, I'll turn to lung cancer in terms of our clinical studies. We have announced publicly that we will be announcing some interim data from our lung cancer study at National Taiwan University in Taipei, Taiwan. We're presenting this data at a oncology conference towards the end of this month. So this data will be announced before the end of the month, and we'll have some initial data here in terms of our lung cancer study at National Taiwan University. With lung cancer, it's a different problem that we hope to address. The problem with lung cancer is a lung biopsy is the definitive diagnosis for lung cancer. The issue that doctors have is that if you are suspected of having lung cancer, so you have symptoms or you're a former smoker or a current smoker, they'll often do a low-dose computed tomography or a CAT scan of your lung or lungs, and then the doctor has to take the image of your lung or lungs and decide if what he or she is seeing on the image appears like it could be a malignant lesion. And then the doctor then has to decide whether or not to send you on for a lung biopsy. The issue with a lung biopsy is there's a cost to it, it's invasive, and unfortunately 15 to 20% of the time it results in a collapsed lung for the patient undergoing a lung biopsy. So doctors really want to be sure before they send a patient on for a lung biopsy or don't send a patient on for a lung biopsy, because what's happening right now is that some doctors think there's suspicion from the image, but the doctors are often reluctant to send that patient on for a lung biopsy unless it's strikingly clear from the image. So the doctors would really, I think, benefit from an additional tool, a Volition blood test, that if it came back positive, the doctor would feel much more comfortable sending that patient on for a lung biopsy. And then again, if it comes back negative and the doctor wasn't quite sure what he or she was seeing on the image was evidence of malignancy, then the doctor would feel much more comfortable about holding off on that lung biopsy, and then maybe in a period of several months running an additional CAT scan and an additional Volition blood test. So the positioning here would be as an adjunct screen for lung cancer, not as a frontline screen, but the utility is immense because it would really help the doctors in deciding whether to send the patient on for the definitive diagnosis. So it would be a very useful tool in making that determination. It would also be very useful because at the time before sending a patient on for a lung biopsy, because it would help to cover them in the event of malpractice. If the patient does have a collapsed lung and there are serious complications, it would help prevent against a lawsuit from that patient potentially, because the doctor could say, look, I had two pieces of information. I had the image that looked suspicious from malignancy, and I had a Volition blood test. That's why I sent the patient on for a lung biopsy. So I think this could be a very large and interesting market as well. And as I mentioned earlier, lung cancer is the deadliest cancer in terms of number of deaths in pretty much every country on Earth. And I'll open it up to Q&A in just a few minutes. I'd like to just finish with, sorry for flipping through so fast, but just finish on some key financials here in our cap structure. So our ticker symbol is VNRX. We're listed on the NYSE American Stock Exchange. Our market cap is around 200 million these days, 52-week range. You can see there, monthly burn of about 1.7 million. Cash on hand, we were at 21 million in cash as of the end of Q3. And then we raised, well, not raised, but we received 4 million in grants and loans about 2 weeks ago. So you can do the math, 21 million at the end of September, burning 1.7 million a month, October, November, December, and then brought in 4 million in January. We're at around that 21 million cash on hand mark. So we've got about a year's worth of cash. How are we going to finance the company beyond 1 year? We have a number of tools available to us. Number one, the preferred way of bringing cash in the door is just as we did it 2 weeks ago. We brought $4 million in loans and grants from the Belgian regional government and some of their associated organizations. We got a couple million in low interest loans, unsecured loans, and some grants. So if we can bring additional capital in that's non-dilutive through that form, we're always attempting to do that each year. So hopefully we'll be able to bring in more of that non-dilutive capital over the course of 2021. Of course, no guarantees. Secondly, we'll have a ramp in sales from our veterinary product. So whatever ramp we see over the course of 2021, that will help to lower our monthly burn, of course. We don't know what the revenue picture looks like this year from the vet product, but the market is fairly large. In addition, we have an ATM with Oppenheimer. We have filed a new ATM with a couple large banks. So to the extent that we can continue raising money through utilizing our ATM facility and bringing in cash each day, each week, each month, we will utilize that. If we could also cross a block off the ATM, if we have strong interest from a healthcare fund, for instance, or a small cap fund, we will do that. And then fourth, of course, you can see from the SEC filings, we have an active S3. So to the extent that the stock would move upward off of good news or milestones, if that were the case, we could always take advantage of any upward price momentum, and we could do a secondary offering off the S3. We have 4 analysts covering the company: Oppenheimer, Zacks, we have Benchmark, we have Aegis and Maxim. I'm sorry, we don't have Oppenheimer, but we have the other 4 that I mentioned. In terms of cap structure, there are about 42 million shares out basic, about 45 million shares out fully diluted. That 3 million share delta, those are all management stock options. We have no warrants on the cap table. We have no convertible debt. We have no equity lines. We have no preferred shares. Very, very clean cap structure. Strong insider ownership. Management team and the board, we own about 20% of the outstanding shares. Institutions own about 20%. And the rest are held through friends, family, and retail. And so, again, I apologize for skipping so fast through the deck, but you can see our website here, our contact information. Our website has a lot of good information on it, some good videos that help you understand the science and technology underlying Volition, and some good interviews with myself, our scientist, our CEO. So I encourage you to go to our website to learn more about Volition. You can also sign up for our press releases on the website. So I do hope that you will continue to follow the Volition story throughout 2021 and beyond. Thank you very much for your time and attention today. And I'd now like to open it up to a question and answer session. So Ahu, I would be happy to take any questions now. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks for the detailed presentation. So I would like to start with the veterinary product. So since you launched it in December, and you mentioned Texas A&M being the commercial channel, are you planning to commercialize the product in any other way, or is it the only channel that you will be focusing on?
That's the primary channel. It may end up being really the only channel that we utilize. They're selling through their website currently. They are then going out to 7 other veterinary colleges to inform that they have relationships with, to inform them that our product is for sale. So hopefully those other 7 will notify their veterinary graduates of the availability of our blood test. And then we've announced publicly that we would like to speak with some of the large animal health companies out there, so Mars, IDEXX, Heska, about a potential licensing deal. That may or may not materialize if they're not interested, or if the terms aren't fair or favorable to Volition, then we wouldn't proceed. But we have announced publicly we are interested in talking to those companies, and hopefully we could strike a licensing agreement that would be very favorable for Volition, that would allow us to penetrate more of the U.S. market and also penetrate the international market.
That makes sense. Scott, so considering the human cancer diagnostic tools that you're using, there are many other cancer diagnostic companies, especially with this biomarker being more predominant in the cancer oncology clinical trials or marketed products. How do you differentiate? What are the differentiating factors? And do you have a patent protection on this unique technology?
Yeah, good questions. There are a number of companies out there working in blood, and I'm sure the audience is familiar with a lot of these companies. The stocks have done quite well over the course of 2020. Some of them are working in blood. The blood really is the preferred modality. What we've been seeing from these competitors is that they tend to be getting better results for later stage cancer, and therefore we're seeing the utility for these blood tests to be more in treatment selection and therapy monitoring after a person has had a definitive diagnosis for a particular cancer. The difference with Volition is we are getting really good early stage cancer detection results. We've gotten some really good results in early stage colorectal cancer, in adenomas or precancerous polyps in colorectal cancer as well. That means that our test can be used as a frontline screen. These competitors, so far they haven't really demonstrated really good accuracy for early stage cancer detection in large studies. And so the FDA won't approve a blood test for frontline screening for a cancer type that isn't good for early stage. That has poor sensitivity, for instance, for early stage cancer, because it's not useful to tell someone they have stage 4 colorectal cancer. It's very useful to tell someone they have stage 1. So that's a differentiating factor. We also have significant patent protection. We have, I think the number is 10 or 11 U.S. patents granted currently, and about the same number of European patents granted. We have close to 100 patents pending, and our granted patents are pretty broad. They're pretty comprehensive. So that's another key advantage. A lot of our competitors, they tend to be doing DNA sequencing, and that technology has been developed and cut up, and the IP has pretty much been taken already and is not really widely held by by one corporation, for instance. Our technology is different. We're looking at Nucleosomics, and we have significant and broad patent protection over this area.
That's helpful, Scott. So my follow-up question will be, are you planning to seek for FDA approval? If so, how does the roadmap look like and the timeline?
Yeah, good question. So for our vet product, we don't have to go through the FDA. We plan to register the product with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the USDA. That's the regulatory body that we would register our animal health product with. For human health, yes, we plan to go through the FDA, not a clear route. We want to go through the FDA, either through a PMA or a 510K pathway. PMA would likely be for colorectal cancer, 510K pathway more likely for lung and blood-borne cancers. We want to position our blood test for colorectal cancer in the U.S. as a frontline screen, just like Cologuard, just like fecal tests, just like the HyperGenomics blood test for colorectal cancer. So that would require a PMA route for the company. For lung cancer, we would envision it as an adjunct to a low-dose computed tomography for blood-borne cancer as an adjunct to other screens. So that would be a 510K pathway for those two cancer types in humans. And so the 510K means a faster pathway, generally smaller studies, generally less costly, generally a little bit easier to move through the FDA process.
Thank you so much, Scott. We much appreciate the information and your participation to our panel, our conference. Thank you.